post recently in my Facebook community and on Instagram about gaslighting. And it always amazes me how many people don't understand what gaslighting is and are often really surprised that within their relationship, they have also been the victims of the narcissist and gaslighting. And I certainly know I can relate to this. So I thought I would do an episode on this just to give you some examples from what I went through to see if you can relate. And also for you just to understand that gaslighting is abuse. This isn't just somebody who's being a little bit mean or a little bit nasty to you. You know, gaslighting happens over a prolonged period of time where it really leaves you doubting your sanity, feeling like you are the crazy one in all of this. And you aren't, you absolutely aren't. But when you're in that situation and you're constantly being either questioned or, you know, that manipulation and coercion that can happen, you really start to lose your sense of self. So I thought to explain this to you, I'd give you really a couple of examples that happened to me. Because when I came out of my relationship with my ex-husband, gosh, sort of 10 years ago now, and I remember my therapist saying to me about being abused and psychologically abused and go and Google narcissist. And all of these things were so new to me that I really didn't believe it. I just genuinely thought I'd been in a marriage that had disintegrated. My husband had had affairs and it didn't work out. And I knew I wasn't feeling great. But again, as a mom of two kids, then finding myself being a single mom, you get on with it, don't you? And I didn't realize until years later when I was healing, and I've obviously gone on and this is what I do now, is that really for, I would say predominantly through the whole of my 30s, I was in what we call functional freeze. So I was taking the kids to school, I was doing all of those things, but I was functioning. I wasn't actually living my life. I was existing. It was like I'd got a job role to do and I would do that and it would be the bare minimum. And my whole body was really in a freeze trauma response, sometimes going into fawn, trying to please the abuser, please the narcissist, you know, doing nice things, wearing nice stuff, trying to appease them in the hope that obviously their behavior would diminish in whatever way. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of some of the things that happened to me in my marriage that maybe you can relate to, because at the time I didn't realize that this is absolute pure gaslighting. So one of the times was when I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter. I was very, very poorly. And this is all in my book, actually. If any of you haven't read my book, Divorce Became My Superpower, all of the ones that I'm going to share with you today, they're all in my book and more. And my book is actually really my story up until probably about 3 years ago. Actually, I need to do another book really on all the work, which is in the offing. There is stuff going on behind the scenes. So watch this space around that. So everything that I'm going to share with you now is all in my book. And when I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter, we'd been through 4 miscarriages. So we had my son, and I'd then had multiple miscarriages. And any of you know that miscarriage at whatever stage, you know, you're already planning the baby, aren't you? You're already decorating a nursery and everything else. So regardless really of how many weeks you lose your baby, it's still a sense of loss to you. So, you know, I was kind of caught up between feeling very grateful I'd got my son, equally devastated that I couldn't seem to be able to hold on to a baby. All of my friends where we'd had the first one together were all getting pregnant and having babies. And, you know, that was highly triggering and activating for me. And when I was fell pregnant with my daughter, I was really poorly, very, very sick. And so I wasn't really eating too much. And I remember one time my husband and my son were sat having dinner. I'd cooked dinner for them. And a text message went off in his phone, which was in his coat, which was in our downstairs lavatory. So I was just walking past and I literally just went to get the phone, genuinely just to hand it to him. And he shot up out of the table, grabbed the phone off me, pressed all of these buttons and completely locked the phone and wasn't able to access it. Now, the phone was actually in my name. I'd actually got both of our phones just because I'd already had a contract, even when we first met, actually. And so I just added when he got his phone onto that. So my gut was kind of saying, that doesn't seem right. There's something dodgy going on there, whilst feeling very, very sick. So I kind of said to him, go back and eat your tea. I'll go and get it unlocked. I'll give EE, that was our provider, a ring. And of course he was like, no, don't worry, it doesn't matter. And the more he was saying that, the more my gut was going, that doesn't seem right. So my heart was starting to pound a little bit more at that stage. Anyway, I went off and into our study and called EE. And, when I look back now, boy, he must have been sweating at that table. And I listened to a voicemail message that had been left. And it was from this woman. Basically didn't mention my ex's name, but mentioned our son's name and mentioned very specific things that were really relevant to my husband and obviously our family. And I literally remember holding the phone and putting it to his ear, and I remember going, get out, like this. So I remember feeling quite sort of strong. My heart was pounding, really, really nervous. And he listened to the message. I wouldn't let him have the phone. He listened to the message and his response was, well, I don't know who that is. And I remember looking him in the eye saying, what? Are you really telling me that this isn't your message? And he said to me, looking me in the eye, I don't know who she is. And at that stage, there was that element of doubt that started to creep in because she didn't say his name. But they mentioned my son's name. They mentioned very specific things that I thought, well, this would be the biggest coincidence in the world if this would have happened. So I looked at the number and I tried calling it back. And this woman answered. It wasn't the same woman though, but it was a different woman who answered. And I just said, oh, you've just tried to call my husband's phone. And she said, oh, yeah, I'm really sorry about that. It was the wrong number. So he was like, see, I don't know who they are. And there was just, again, this is when you have to listen to your gut. Remember, in our gut, we have more messages coming from our gut to our brain than our brain to our gut. And I remember thinking, no, that's not right. It's not right. But then my husband's looking me in the eye and I've called this number and they're now saying, no, it's a mistake. And then I started to do some more digging. And I started to look at the number. I looked, now my husband at the time worked for an airline. He was cabin crew. So I looked at the area code and it was Chicago. And I went and looked at his roster. He'd had a lot of Chicagos as well. And yeah, there was just something not right. I called my parents even at that stage. This is when my mum was still alive. And they came over. And I let them listen to the message. And I remember them sat there looking at my husband going, well, it doesn't really look good, does it? And he looked my parents in the eye and said, I don't know who she is. And he was almost getting irate in some respects that how dare we quiz him on all of this because it wasn't true. And I remember my parents went home that night and we were in separate bedrooms. And I remember going downstairs and looking at his roster and I just remember thinking, am I going crazy here? I remember thinking that, am I crazy for thinking that actually this woman was definitely phoning my husband, but then my husband's looking at me in the eye and going, it's not true. Who do I believe? Do I believe my gut or do I believe my husband, who I'm meant to be married to, who we have a family, who I'm 6 months pregnant with and we have a son? And I was really starting to think, and this is when I started to really think then, maybe it is me. Maybe I am overreacting in all of this. And I remember the next day when we woke up, I was still kind of, oh, that's not right. It doesn't seem right. And I remember saying, because they had like a crew card at that stage for allowances when they were abroad. And I said, can I just see your crew card then? I thought, I'm going to go and see if he's been buying stuff. I didn't really know what I was doing at that stage. And I went and had a look, couldn't access it. But when he gave me his wallet to get the crew card, there was a little business card for a motel in Chicago with a reservation number on the back. So I called it and I said, oh, hello, I'm Mr. Strawson's PA. I'm just checking a reservation number. And they said to me, oh, it was cancelled last week. So I was like, okay, thank you. And I remember going into our lounge and standing there and saying, are you still going to keep denying this? And I remember to this day, there was still a number of seconds that he was almost thinking, can I get away with this, or do I have to own up now? Now, at that stage, he did own up and he did tell me. But guess what? The tears started to tell me about the situation. It was this other woman who was away from her family. We'd had the miscarriages. It was just really kind of this connection that we just felt really bad. And I ended up calling this woman on the phone. And guess what I did? I ended up comforting them both. I ended up comforting my husband for having an affair on me. And I ended up comforting her because she was telling me about the situation she had. And the one thing, though, she didn't know that I was pregnant, and that really upsets her. So again, I know many of you, if you know and you find out that your partner's been having an affair, you really hone in on the person that they've had the affair with. I've never done that because I also know that the narcissist will say and do exactly what they need to do to get that narcissistic supply. So I never blame or project that onto whoever the person has had an affair with. And I do see that a lot in my community. And I try and say, you know, no, everyone's an adult here. You still have those choices. And I know people talk about, you know, brotherhood, sisterhood, and you wouldn't do stuff like that. But remember, you don't know what they are saying, and they can be really convincing. Narcissists can be extremely convincing. So I had 24 hours with there where I was thinking, am I the crazy one? And then another scenario I remember when my husband was he was 8 hours late coming home from work. And normally once he landed, he would drop me a text saying, I'm just on my way. And on this particular day, no text. And about 2.5 hours passed where I thought, oh, okay. So I went online, I checked, yep, the flight had landed okay. Another hour passed, 3.5 hours. I was trying to call, he was just calling out and going straight to voicemail. I even called the airline to say, did any incidents happen? Because I used to work for the airline many years ago. That's how we met, because I loved traveling at the time. And so I knew the policies, I knew how things worked. And I called them up and there was nothing. And in fact, the person I spoke to almost made me think, do you not know where your husband is, kind of thing. But I was still kind of worried as well, because I thought, what if he'd had a crash? So the next thing, I called the police. And they were lovely. They got the registration number of his car. They contacted local paramedics on the areas, the journey home that he could have gone, to see if there'd been any accidents. There hadn't. At this stage, we were up to sort of 6 hours now. And I was going really worried at this stage, thinking, what the hell has happened? And then I get this call out of the blue, and it was my husband. And I was like, where have you been? And his reply, I think I killed somebody. I'll say that again. I think I killed somebody. This is the kind of warped life you end up living when you are with a narcissist. And I said to him, what do you mean you've killed somebody? And he said, oh, I don't want to talk about it. And I said, are you okay to drive home? Do you need me to come and get you or anything? No, I just want to get home. So I put the phone down. And when he got home, he walked in. And the moment he walked in, he took his shirt off and put it in the bin. I didn't think anything of it at the time, other than the fact he was really shaky and he was really obviously very, activated. And I said, well, what happened then? And he was quite cagey, and he said, oh, I don't want to talk about it. It was just, oh my God. And I said, well, no, tell me what happened. How can I help? And the story that he told me was, as he was getting off the aeroplane, this old lady had tripped up just as she was getting off onto the jetty at Heathrow and banged her head. And he ended up having to perform CPR on her, and he didn't do it right, and she ended up dying. Now, there were a number of flaws in that story. I mean, A, I have a medical background. B, I've worked for the airline. So my questions were, well, where were the rest of the crew? And where were the paramedics? And how do you know she died? Did they take her away on a gurney? So I was kind of envisaging what could have happened, and it just didn't make sense. It just didn't make sense. And the more I was asking those questions, the more angry he was getting at me. Oh, stop asking me these questions. Stop it. Stop it. And making me feel bad. So in the end, I was like, okay, I'm sorry for asking questions. And the next morning, I was just gently again trying to ask questions, because again, my gut was kind of saying to me that this doesn't feel right. This isn't right in this scenario. So, and again, he was getting angry at me, and he was getting angry at me for asking the way I was asking, as opposed to answering the questions that I was actually asking him. And it started to leave me thinking, did this happen? Did it not happen? This is my husband telling me this, so surely I should be believing him, but just something doesn't feel right about any of this. And I suppose at that stage, it was really towards the end of when we were really, I think we split up probably about 6 months after that. And I'm wondering whether that was that particular day where he'd spent the day then with the woman I think he eventually left for. And that maybe, I don't know, but that could have been that in that scenario. But it left me then feeling like my husband's looking me in the eye and telling me he's killed somebody. It doesn't feel right from an evidence-based, experience-based perspective. What do? Do I keep on grilling him and him being like this to me? Do I forget about it? So I remember saying to him when he went back to work, saying, you need to have a word with your line manager, because they need to let people know, like myself, if you're going to be late because you're having a debrief, that obviously we're going to get worried about that. And he was like, yeah, I'll do that. Anyway, when he went to work, gets better. When he went to work and he called me and said, I've just spoken to my line manager. Guess what? And I was like, what? And he said, she didn't die. In fact, I saved her. And she's so grateful to me for saving her life. So this whole story had gone from killing somebody and her dying, doing CPR wrong, etc., to suddenly she was alive and he was a hero then in all of this. And I remember again thinking, are these all such a bunch of lies? And it just shows how rock bottom I was at that stage, because if someone fed me all of that now, I'd be like, what? But at the time, I was so much in freeze, so dissociated, so much in that trauma response. Really, my only response was, well, that's good then, well done. And again, there are many stories like this, and you may well find as well with a narcissist, they're quite extreme stories that they can come up with too, because they're, if my husband had been late 8 hours and said his car broke down and his battery on his phone, I'd have probably believed that more than I've killed somebody and this whole scenario. And this happened on many occasions with these extreme versions of stories that I was fed. And I like to think of myself as an intelligent woman. And I was like questioning, that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem true. But if I asked those questions, I would get shouted down. I would be told I was so sensitive. And it wasn't then the questions that he was answering, it was how I was asking those questions. So there was never any of those questions being answered. So I was constantly left feeling unsure, crazy. Am I oversensitive? Is it me? Am I paranoid? So they were all the things that I was really feeling like. And the reason why I wanted to share those stories from my perspective, the ones that are in my book, is that, just talking about gaslighting, I still don't think people fully understand what it is. And it's when you have a friend, even a partner, family member, constantly telling you things and almost you feel like it's not quite true, but when you try and ask or get some reassurance or just want to know some more facts about a situation that maybe just doesn't feel quite right, you are shouted down. You are told you're sensitive. You are told you're paranoid. You are told, I never said that. You're told all of these sentences, and it really leaves you doubting your own sanity, and you really start to lose your sense of self. And actually, in relationships where gaslighting is prevalent, which it normally is in narcissistic relationships, you end up completely isolating yourself from other people. Because I felt like if I then went and spoke to a friend or a family member about what my husband was doing, like I did initially, say when I found out about his affair when I was 6 months pregnant, if I was constantly telling all of these stories, what would they say? Well, just leave then. And my system, again, felt safer being in that relationship, having breadcrumbs of love, breadcrumbs in a relationship felt better and safer for me and my system than having nobody. I was accepting of breadcrumbs and it felt better than having nothing. And that was because, and that obviously had come from my past experiences and my own self-worthiness wounds about not feeling good enough. I'd felt marginally more good enough being in a relationship, even though it was so toxic, than not being in a relationship. And that was how my system was. Of course, now I've done all of this healing. That is absolutely not the case. But that is why we can never judge anybody who stays in a relationship. And again, if you have a friend or family member who's talking to you maybe about partner or their parents who are constantly gaslighting, and you can see that, try not to just tell them to leave or ignore, because it's very difficult to do that in situations where their system feels it's safer to stay. Just listen without judgment, but with compassion and love, so that they know that they can still talk about it. Because as they talk about it and feel believed and feel heard, that really helps someone's system, and that can actually help them more towards healing than you saying, well, just leave, just ignore it, as well. So I hope that maybe gave you some examples. Share your examples with me. I would love to hear. Have you got any gaslighting examples? Maybe your ex said they killed somebody. And again, these stories can be really extreme that, to the outside world, they think, well, I wouldn't believe that. But when you're in it, and this insidious form of psychological abuse, gaslighting, you end up believing it. Even though your gut is probably saying it isn't true, but it feels safer to believe it, to stay, than to go. That feels more dangerous. So share your stories. And if you are in that relationship, your safety is your priority with all of that. And I'm sending all my love, and there's no judgment from me whatsoever. But just keep watching, listening to my YouTube channel, my podcast. Come and join my Facebook community, or even my Narcissistic Trauma Recovery Program, so that you can be heard and supported without judgment, with compassion, to heal the trauma of narcissistic abuse. Because gaslighting can leave you feeling like you are the crazy one. And I'm here to tell you, you are not crazy. This is not your fault. And there is hope. There is hope. There is a light at the end of that tunnel. It's just taking that first step. But safety is the primary responsibility for you with all of that. So stay safe, lots of love, and you can find your way out of this.